The 2016 election is one for the record books, and we are looking at it from another perspective.
We wanted to know, why is it rare, not normal, for there to be more than 2 major candidates?
Join us as we go across the country,
Talk to experts and voters,
follow candidates,
and explore the lesser-known parts of our election system.
This is episode 1, 15%.
This is the first time we have seen both major party candidates viewed unfavorably by a majority of voters, which may not surprise you, George. 44% say they would like to see a third party candidate.
We all know this now, but the 2016 election is a rare one. Record disapproval ratings for the major party candidates has enabled third-party candidates to pull double digits nationally, and that matters. If a candidate is polling 15% nationwide in mid-September, they get an invite to the presidential debates. That changes the dynamic of an election. An example of this is Ross Perot in 1992. He was invited to the debates when he was polling about 9%. After a series of strong performances, he ends up capturing nearly 20% of the popular vote. Despite clear signs of a population frustrated with partisanship, like a rise in independent voters, and Americans currently and historically asking for more third-party inclusion, only 2 elections have had non-major party candidates participate in debates. Why is that?
15%, again, this is our job to give you political context, is a gargantuan number.
To reach 15%, you got to spend like $400 million.
These rules are partisan rules because they're the creatures of partisan people.
And by the way, I think if you were to take a poll or just interview average Americans and ask them even if they had even heard of the Commission on Presidential Debates or if they knew who was hosting the debates, they assume it's some kind of a government agency, which would be operating much more in the public domain so that it could be more accountable. This is, critical to how we elect our leader, and it's a black hole.
Before you say we should take off our tinfoil hats and crawl out of our mom's basement, you should note, that's not a basement, that's an office on the 40th floor of a Manhattan high-rise, and that's not our mom. That's Alexander Shapiro, a highly respected lawyer who clerked under Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and is recognized as one of the top appellate lawyers in America. If she's questioning something, it's worth listening. Earlier, you may have noticed that I said Perot got in with 9%. To understand why the debate cutoff is 15% now, and before we go further into 2016, let's take a step back to 1960. It was the year the United States first televised presidential debates. 70 million Americans tuned in to watch Nixon and Kennedy debate over the future of the nation. To make that debate a reality, Congress had to suspend the equal time provision of the 1934 Communications Act. Otherwise, the networks broadcasting the debates would have been legally bound to give equal time to all presidential candidates. Given that hundreds of people run in any election, good luck getting a TV exec to do that. Anyway, the debates happened, were massively popular, and many claim were key to Kennedy winning. Campaigns began to respect the power of televised debates. In 64, 68, and 72, incumbent presidents decided to not take the risk, and Congress never suspended equal time. Political strategy robbed the American public of the opportunity to compare candidates side by side. In 1975, this changed. The FCC decided that debates could be broadcast without equal time as long as they were hosted by a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. The League of Women Voters, a group born of the struggle to pass the 19th Amendment, took on sponsorship of the debates. In 1976, as a challenger, Jimmy Carter was eager to participate. In 1980, as incumbent president, his motives changed. Candidate John Anderson ran as an independent after losing the Republican primary to Reagan, polled 15%, and was invited to debate.
Then Carter made a decision, which I think in retrospect was wrong, not to participate in the Baltimore debate that Anderson and Reagan did.
It wasn't necessarily Carter being afraid of debating or not wanting to get in there. It was
we don't want to give legitimacy to
Yes,
Anderson.
yeah, that was a key strategy.
After the first debate, Anderson's numbers dipped and he was not invited to the second debate. Carter participated, but in a lot of ways his strategy backfired and he went on to lose the election.
There you go again.
80 exposed a couple important things. Campaigns and presidents will use debates in larger political strategies, and the League of Women Voters struggled to control them. This uneasy relationship between campaigns and sponsor continued into 1984. Negotiations were difficult. Campaigns vetoed a ridiculous number of panelists, and Barbara Walters called them out on manipulating the process for political gain.
The candidates were given a list of almost 100 qualified journalists from all the media and could agree on only these 3 fine journalists. As moderator and on behalf of my fellow journalists, I very much regret, as does the League of Women Voters, that this situation has occurred.
At this point, the relationship between campaigns and sponsor was strained. This sparked a debate about debates and who was best suited to be a sponsor. Parties, networks, even Congress made arguments to host.
Myself and a couple of Republican people, with the blessing of the party chairman, both sides, met at the Prime Rib restaurant. And we had an excellent long martini-filled lunch. And the upshot was, let's get an independent commission formed that would in fact take over the debate system from the League of Women Voters, which was a gutsy move because they had reached sainthood.
This lunch led to what would later be known as the Commission on Presidential Debates.
We said that in an independent commission would have better communication with the campaigns and had some stature amongst the party leadership. And in fact, it did.
2 academic studies went on to endorse the party's plan and agreed they would be the best sponsor. In 1987, the commission was officially formed, with the heads of the Republican and Democratic parties taking the co-chair positions. In '88, this enabled the Bush and Dukakis campaigns to negotiate their own rules for how they wanted the debates to go down. They then took these rules to both debate sponsors.
Never in the long history of the League of Women Voters have 2 candidates' organizations come to us with such stringent, unyielding, and self-serving demands. In Winston-Salem, which you know was not a League of Women Voters debate, they went so far as to insist on reviewing the moderator's opening comments. It turned out that the League had 2 choices. We could sign their closed-door agreement and hope the event would rise above the manipulations, or we could refuse to lend our trusted name to this charade. The League of Women Voters is announcing today that we have no intention of becoming an accessory to the hoodwinking of the American public.
Ms. Newman has been quoted as saying that the parties are an accessory to hoodwinking the American people. Have you been hoodwinking the American people?
I certainly hope not. I think that what we tried to do is to put on debates that belong to the American people. Those are the people, after all, who benefit from these and are in a position to judge the sponsoring organization. The reviews we received on Monday from many of your colleagues were certainly very good. I think we're in a position to do it again. As you know, the Commission's one and only purpose is to put on debates, and I believe we're in a position to do a professional job. I have no intention of hoodwinking anybody.
With no League of Women Voters, the Commission took on all 3 presidential debates. In order to fulfill the pre-established criteria requirement to sponsor a debate, the Commission tapped Harvard professor Richard Neustadt to create a checklist of qualifications known as the Neustadt criteria. In 1992, the criteria in the Commission got their first test. President George Bush was stalling negotiations and only moved when public pressure forced his hand. During Bush's delays, Ross Perot, the former frontrunner who had dropped out in July, re-entered the race, further complicating the situation.
There was some pulling and tugging. Okay. But it was an initial wish and ultimate wish the commission would include Perot.
Both Bush and Clinton thought Perot's involvement would hurt their opponent. Perot rises to the occasion and doubles his standing, going from 9% to almost 20%. 4 years later, Perot is back on the campaign trail and polling just 2 percentage points lower than 1992. But something odd happens. He doesn't get invited to debate. A similar performance that got him in the debates in 1992 did not qualify him 4 years later. Perot immediately goes to court and asks for an emergency hearing. Things did not go his way.
This was a most remarkable decision by Judge Hogan because he recognized the unfairness of the process that was set up by the Commission on Presidential Debates. And he said if he had his way, he would change this process.
The commission won the lawsuit, but public pressure forced them to take on a more objective criteria similar to the League of Women Voters. Now to be invited, a candidate must be constitutionally eligible, be on enough state ballots to be able to win the Electoral College, and be polling 15% nationally. Since 2000, no non-major party candidate has reached the 15% mark. This brings us up to today.
My name is Lee Maringoff. I am director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion in Poughkeepsie, New York. The institute was founded in 1978. I was very young.
Lee wrote an article criticizing polls as debate criteria for the Republican primaries. We also wanted to learn more about how a polling institution chooses who to include on polls.
And I guess 15% has sort of been this figure that I guess the commission sort of uses, which from a polling standpoint means if the poll has a narrow margin of 3, what you're really saying is, well, if they're between 12 and 18, that's what you're really saying statistically, which is sort of an odd thing. I guess I feel polls should be part of it. I think the ability to raise money should be part of it. I think ballot access, in other words, do you have a viable campaign? Is the news judgment such that this person has some demonstrable support that they should be included in a debate?
That news judgment comment is interesting. Ultimately, that's how a candidate will start to be included in polls.
Just to say, do you support Donald Trump, the Republican, Hillary Clinton, the Democrat, or Gary Johnson, the Libertarian, or Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate? I just did it. Doesn't cost me any time. So I mean, that's not a problem. It's not a mechanical problem.
Then who makes the call to include them or not?
If they're our client, Chuck Todd will be the final arbiter of what should be in that poll. There's no agenda. People want to be accurate and they want to be right from a news standpoint. I think the biggest thing working against a third party in America is that we're a two-party system. You don't get much for finishing third. What you get is you may have affected who finished first or second. So it's hard not to be the spoiler. And I think right now, the interest in a Johnson and a Stein candidacy is probably who are they drawing disproportionately from, if in fact that's the case. How do you want to get in the polls? Show you've got a campaign, show you've got some support, show you raise some money, show you're on the ballot, you have organization on the ground in some states. People aren't going to say, well, I don't want to do that.
You thought they were gone, but the old subjective newstat criteria still exist. Just pass through to the journalists who are deciding who is newsworthy and worth polling. This is why we've seen possible third-party or independent candidates decide to run inside of the party structure.
Wouldn't it be more revolutionary to work outside the traditional political party structure and run as a...
See, the problem is Chuck would not have me on his program if I did that.
Well, that is not true.
Oh, sure.
We love independents running. The more the merrier.
Look, here's the truth. We concluded, and I think it was absolutely the right decision, that in terms of media coverage, you had to run within the Democratic Party.
The heavily reported party primaries create a venue for candidates to grow their name recognition without the stigma of being a spoiler.
The FBI is announcing Hillary's. So far, he's just kind of saying, yeah, she used email, whatever.
In order to hope to poll at close to 15%, you have to have name recognition in the 60 to 80% range. And just to give you an idea, I've seen polls that show that only 80% of people in America know who Vice President Biden is.
We finally caught up with our friend Alexandra Shapiro. She's head counsel for Level the Playing Field, a group trying to make it easier for independent candidates to get debate access.
If I told you, let's pass a law in this country that only Democrats or Republicans can be president forever, you wouldn't think much of that law. In fact, you think the law is unconstitutional. That's mathematically what we have today. Because the two parties have made rules, clever by half, integrating lots of different electoral functions that basically make it impossible for non-Democrats or Republicans to compete.
How do they sell that to the public?
They don't. The public doesn't see it. There's no sell. These rules don't have to be sold.
This is Dr. Peter Ackerman, expert on nonviolent conflict, venture capitalist, and head of Level the Playing Field. He has been trying to fix the problems with our nomination process through innovation since before the 2008 election.
I've been working at this for nine and a half years now. And it's all explainable if you go down the path I've been down.
When Peter received a call to lead the fundraising effort for a group trying to create an online nominating process named Unity 08, he said yes. However, Ackerman and the Unity 08 team soon found themselves up against unfavorable fundraising restrictions imposed by the Federal Election Commission.
We have different rules for smaller parties and larger ones. So even though you needed $30 million, turned out to be $38 million to build the infrastructure to do what you want to do, you can only do it in $5,000 increments.
You basically came to the calculation that, okay, this is impossible.
I would have to have 20,000 meetings to raise the money. And they know it, and so in effect, they've shut us down.
Peter and his team sued the Election Commission, lost, then hired Alexandra to head the appeal. They won and used that victory to start Americans Elect.
Welcome to Americans Elect. For the first time, the American people are choosing a leader that works for us, not just the parties and their special interests. In a national online primary, we the people are defining the crucial issues. We the people are choosing the candidates. And we the people are nominating a third choice for president.
We got three important things done. The first is we went out and got ballot access in 41 states with the largest signature drive in the history of this country. We ultimately raised $38 million. And we created a website with 40 million people prepared to vote.
Money, ballot access, and millions of people registered to vote? What happened?
They were unable to recruit a candidate, and one of the big reasons for that was that something that Peter and his colleagues hadn't thought about, which was that it's almost impossible to get into the debates if you're not a Democrat or a Republican.
And when they said they're thinking of running an Americans Elect, they'd suddenly find a finger point to their chest saying that'd be bad for you.
They kind of burn all their bridges with whatever party they were affiliated with.
Without a debate podium, the career risk for a qualified candidate was just too high. Peter and the team looked into what it would take to build name recognition high enough to poll 15%.
What does do it is a sequencing of events that parties provide. They provide polling, debates, primaries, more debates, more primaries, and you season your name over time.
Remember, we heard this is why Bernie joined the Democratic Party, but also
that to run as an independent, you could be a billionaire. If you're a billionaire, you can do that. I'm not a billionaire.
The amount of money you'd have to spend, including the paid media and just basic campaign operations, would be about $250 million. 15% is basically impossible for anyone who doesn't run in the primaries.
Even a well-known billionaire we're all familiar with looked at these rules in 2000 and determined that a run outside of the two parties would not make the debate stage, perhaps foreshadowing a future choice of his. After research concluded 15% is unreasonable, Level the Playing Field filed an administrative complaint with the Federal Election Commission, and in an effort to avoid legal action, sent a letter to the Commission on Presidential Debates asking them to reconsider the rule.
50 prominent Americans from all walks of life joined this effort to try to persuade the CPD to voluntarily change this rule.
Leverage on your second rule, which is to get on the ballot. And then whoever's done that by April will be the third. And with 6 months to go, we'll know who the third in the debate is.
Which is critical because that enables the press to cover you as a viable candidate. How did the commission react to this?
They posted on their website that they would welcome suggestions and hold an open process to consider them. And then the next thing you know is several months later, they announced that they're just going with the same rules they've used in the past.
After getting nowhere, Level the Playing Field has taken legal action against the Federal Election Commission for improper regulation of the Commission on Presidential Debates. Some might be wondering why they aren't in court against the Debate Commission directly. Well, you can't. Remember the Perot case?
And yet he said his hands were tied by the congressional statute, which said that only the FEC could consider these claims.
It's very important for people to understand what we do and what we don't do. We have a very simple, clear mission. We put on the debates. That's what we do.
I think 2008 has been the only cycle that we and the League of Women Voters before us weren't sued.
This is Mike McCurry, and on the phone is Frank Fahrenkopf, co-chairs of the Commission on Presidential Debates. Mike is former Director of Communications for the Democratic National Committee. Frank is former chairman of the Republican National Committee and was there when the decision was made to create a debate sponsor that had intentional ties to the two major parties.
They thought if the parties, back then when we first created it, produced the debates, that would be a way to hopefully convince the candidates not to do what Jimmy Carter did in 1980, and that you wouldn't go through the problems that existed in 1984. That was the rationale, I think, of those two committees at their recommendations. But it was never easy.
So that was then. What about now? How do they claim to be a nonpartisan group?
It was always a process I'd best describe, starting in '88 and ending really in 2000. 2 steps forward, 1 back. It wasn't until 2000 where the candidates and the parties were totally out of decision-making.
2000 was also the year the commission adopted the controversial 15% criteria. How was that decision made?
We looked back at what the league had done, and we thought that was an objective standard that they had used. They had been sued, and the courts had upheld it. Mm-hmm. And so we felt that was the most objective we could be, and went with it.
Since 2000, many people have claimed the 15% rule is purposely unfair to keep out competition. With new data showing the magnitude of the hurdle and an electorate historically dissatisfied, why did it stay the same in 2016?
We spent more time on it this cycle than any other cycle, and we came out to decide to stay at 15. It wasn't unanimous. It was overwhelming, but it wasn't unanimous. The discussion primarily was, do we stay at 15 or do we lower it from 15 to something else? It wasn't that we would throw out the use of a polling rule.
What other valid measure is there? You know, some people have suggested, well, let's have a national signature drive. Well, that's very open to manipulation. Or let's have some kind of other plebiscite or some other online measure. Well, then that excludes people who frankly aren't online, don't have access to the internet. So, you know, in thinking through what is the best way to sort of measure and apply the criteria, you have to kind of carefully consider what the alternatives are, and we haven't heard a very valid or good alternative.
How are they approaching the fact that a candidate is points away from the margin of error for the first time since they implemented the 15% criteria?
We have all the criteria, but it comes down to that question of the test in this sample of polls of whether or not you're at 15%. Each of those polls has got a margin of error. So what happens if Gary Johnson's at 13.5% and he's within the margin of error? We have not, you know, we're going to have a serious discussion about that issue. I don't think we have an answer to that question right now.
With an electorate crying out for change, can the commission play any role in alleviating that concern?
What role can we have in reforming politics? The answer is none. That's not our role. I mean, our role is to put on debates and make sure the American people get to see the candidates that they expect to see on stage. And so our axiom is we take the campaign as it is at the moment that we have to run these debates. And if there are 2 candidates, 3 candidates, 4 candidates who, you know, the American people are seriously looking at, they have to be leading candidates. They have to have demonstrated support. We have a percentage level that they have to reach in order to be seriously considered. And we think that protects the interests of the American people who want to see candidates regardless of party.
We agree. The commission's role is to put on debates, not reform the entire political process. But debate access is absolutely a part they can control. This affects everyone. Their access criteria has a ripple effect that impacts the choices we have while electing our leaders. Both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, outsiders that did not fit traditional party molds, ran through the party systems to ensure media coverage and debate access. This has had a huge impact on the Democratic and Republican parties. The 15% criteria was first established a generation ago in a completely different era of technology, media, and political identity. Every cycle, third-party and independent candidates have to play catch-up on name recognition with less media exposure that pins them first as spoilers rather than potentially viable candidates. The commission has watched complacently as our political identifications have shifted away from major parties and continue to rely on an old standard, even recognizing that it may need to improvise this election. But does it really need to take record levels of dissatisfaction for this to happen? Since 1976, no one has become president without participating in the debates. You don't get into the debates unless you run through the party system or have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend. Protected by the Federal Election Commission and operated by political veterans, the Commission on Presidential Debates is a unique organization. Instead of protecting the American voters from themselves, the commission needs to own up to what they can control.